So what we're going to do is we're here to expose it, let people tell their story, and let everybody in the public see the horrors of the court system in Suffolk County, New York.
Long Island Backstory. Long Island's news alternative to the Newsday Cablevision news monopoly. With Chief Correspondent Gary Jacobs.
Hi, I'm Gary Jacobs, and welcome to another edition of Long Island Backstory, where we film at the Cablevision studios here in Hauppauge, New York. Today, my guest is Dr. Roy Aranda, and we're going to talk about terrorism, which, of course, is very popular right now. It's in the news. It's on everybody's mind. We're going to talk about the myths, the facts, and how do we deal with terrorism, both personally and how to prevent it from happening. I really don't like reading too much from my sheet, but Dr. Aranda has got like a huge list of accomplishments, and I'll try to read it as fast as I can. I just think for the sake of the show, it's important to know who we're talking to, because this is really you're really a premier person in this field. Dr. Aranda attained his PhD from the Graduate School of Applied and Professional Psychology, Rutgers University in 1982, a 2-year postdoctoral degree in neuropsychology in 2001, and a law degree in 2007. He's been a licensed psychologist since 1983. Dr. Aranda is president of Long Island Psychological Consulting. He's performed He's been in several high-profile cases, including the Happy Land trial in New York City, and the terrorist trial of Sheikh Rachmel Achman, who was the person who first tried to bomb the World Trade Center. Dr. Aranda has traveled extensively and made many presentations abroad, and was awarded the honorary status of visiting professor at the John F. Kennedy University in Buenos Aires, Argentina. He made frequent presentations at universities and professional organizations and has written several articles. Dr. Aranda is president-elect of the New York State Psychological Association, past president of the Long Island Hispanic Bar Association. He served as president-elect of the Hispanic Neuropsychology Society in 2013, president in 2014, and is past president this year. Dr. Aranda organized the Hispanic Neuropsychology Society's first conference, Forensic Neuropsychology Assessment of Hispanics, held at St. John's University in Queens, New York, on October 2014. Dr. Aranda has received several awards throughout his career. He received the Suffolk County Psychological Association Psychologist of the Year in 2013, NYSPA Distinguished Service Award in 2013, and NYSPA Diversity Award in 2014. In January of 2015, he was honoree at the first annual NAACP Long Island Legacy Gala, honoring men and women who have built or continued legacies on Long Island. He's received the Mayor's Special Recognition Award by Incorporated Village of Hempstead and at a celebration dinner in 2015 on the occasion of being elected president of the New York State Psychological Association. Dr. Aranda received the Certificate of Special Congressional Recognition in September of 2015 in recognition of his outstanding and invaluable service to the community. He received an award at the Long Island Hispanic Bar Association Scholarship Gala in September of 2015 for dedicated service to the organization and Latino community at large. Most recently, Dr. Aranda received a Lifetime Achievement Award for 25 years of service to the Hempstead Hispanic Civic Association at their annual gala in November, and was honored with the Mayor's Special Recognition Award by the Incorporated Village of Hempstead, citation by Nassau County Legislature, and citation by Ed Bengano, County Executive of Nassau County. Dr. Aranda aspires to see the American Psychological Association and its affiliates flourish into top-notch association that advocates for all psychologists and promotes the study and practice of psychology throughout his professional career. Dr. Aranda has been passionate about raising awareness and the competence in the clinical, forensic, and neuropsychological assessment and treatment of Hispanics. He is especially supportive of early career psychologists and graduate students. Wow, that's some long resume.
Aren't you glad that that's the abbreviation?
that was, and I actually took
I feel so badly.
I took some of the stuff out, but I think it's important because terrorism is such an important issue.
We're doing terrorism, but that has to have been an act of torture.
Yeah, that was, but that's okay. We got through it. So let's start at the beginning and tell me, what is forensic psychology?
Well, forensic psychology is the interface of psychology and the law. So psychology deals with human emotions, behaviors, and the law deals with criminal, civil kinds of matters. So when you integrate psychology with the law, you may have civil applications such as occupational injuries, personal injuries, slip and falls, negligence, those kinds of lawsuits, medical malpractice, negligence. When you're dealing with criminal aspects, it might be what psychological components are involved in a person who committed a crime. Is there any basis to maybe in some ways reduce a particular charge, or could there be intellectual or cognitive deficiencies?
So is a forensic psychologist have a law degree?
No. I do. I thought that it would be beneficial for me to not only pursue studies in neuropsychology, but also in law to further not only my education, but my ability to interact with the legal system and being a better informant to the court, to the judge when I prepare my reports.
Right, okay. So, I mean, now we basically hear what a forensic, I'm sure there's a lot more to all the different fields, but I want to talk about the terrorism today. And you really have a good perspective, probably better than anybody. Are all terrorists mentally ill?
No. In fact, probably very few actually would qualify for a bona fide diagnosis of mental illness, and that's probably a misperception that society has. In fact, we often see all of these hard crimes, serial killings, mass murders, and immediately the public outcry is these people are mentally ill.
We should have caught it.
Yeah, certainly there's an element of mental illness. I'm not going to say that it actually doesn't exist, but you have many people that are doing or committing violent acts for some other reason. Substance abuse tends to increase the likelihood of commission of a violent act along with mental.
But we normally don't hear
illness.
about the substance abuse with the terrorism that we're seeing today, right?
No,
That's
but what you are seeing are different kinds of political, religious ideologies. People may be disgruntled. They may be selected at an early age and sort of groomed, right. and indoctrinated into a particular way of seeing things. They may believe that what they're doing is not morally wrong. They may believe that it's certainly morally correct.
But isn't somebody just take somebody? I mean, I always thought if you can kill a stranger, you have to be mentally ill.
Yeah,
that would be incorrect then.
It would be. I mean, we have the majority of people who commit homicides and or violent crimes are not actually mentally ill. There are other reasons why they commit the crimes, and you need to certainly, part of any evaluation, if you're doing an evaluation, would look into factors, motivations. There could be jealousy, for instance, in a husband seeking out an estranged wife, for instance. There could be elements of financial gain. We're seeing a lot, for instance, in the area of crimes for some sort of a motive. Recently we had, for instance, in Roosevelt Field, we had a Movado watch store that was recently burglarized at the Roosevelt Field Mall. I'm sure that the guy went straight for the Rolexes, so he certainly knew what he was doing.
Right.
I'm not sure.
Does it matter though, from your perspective? Does it matter if they're mentally ill?
Well, I mean, I think it does matter, because to the extent that society immediately pushes buttons and thinks that our mental health system is broken, doesn't work, and maybe we need tighter laws and we should put everybody, lock them up or institutionalize all of them. That's not helpful. The mental health system in the United States needs help. I'm not going to say it doesn't need help, but it needs financial assistance, it needs resources, it needs people really reaching out to people. Look at veterans, for instance. Veterans come back they're hardly getting warm welcome. Many of them are treated like third-class citizens. The insurance carriers are quick to drop them. The government is quick to ignore their needs. These are problems, and they come back with substance abuse issues as well as PTSD.
Right. So let me ask, going back to the terrorism thing. So if they're not mentally ill, and you mentioned maybe they're indoctrinated as a child, and I think that's part of what we hear, that, hey, these people are raised this way so that it's acceptable to them. So what I'm sort of getting is, now we're talking about these children coming into the country, right? And everybody's saying, well, they're innocent children. How do we? They're fleeing oppression. How do we stop them from coming in? The other people that say, well, these aren't just innocent children. Like they may be indoctrinated. And now you have a 12-year-old kid who's been hearing since the time he can speak that it's okay to commit jihad. How do we rationalize this? What's your feeling? Do we say, hey, no kids can come in? Is there a way to screen these kids out and have a psychological exam and say, well, this person was indoctrinated and may commit it? What do we do?
This is where you're stepping on really a legal quagmire, because you're dealing with people who have not committed a crime, for instance.
Right.
So in order to say separate them out. And this is something, for instance, that may be happening in schools, where you're looking at bullying as an example. Certain children may fit a particular profile. They're receiving some brief, cursory kinds of screenings, and then some of them are being targeted for some sort of an intervention before the fact. Morally, can you do it? Legally, can you do it? And what about the false positives? You're going to be selecting people that would do nothing, right. And on the other hand, you're going to be missing people who probably would. So looking at them in that way, I think, is probably not particularly helpful. I think that if you're looking at immigration, they need, in my opinion, I mean, I'm sure that they have some ways of vetting individuals that they grant student visas and or temporary visas or visiting visas or working visas to come into this country. I get very worried when you have people who plowed into the World Trade Center, 9/11, and I believe that 2 or 3 of them were granted continuation of their visas even after they died. I mean, that sort of tells me
obviously there wasn't much
that they're not being monitored.
Vetting in there, right.
You have a whole bunch of them come. They're told you have to check in with us in 3 months, and they disappear. I mean, it sort of should trigger like a couple of things.
That's common sense. But what I'm sort of getting it from a forensic psychologist. Do you think there's any way that we can sit down with a high probability of accuracy and speak to these people who are trying to come into our country and find out if there's a propensity to them becoming a terrorist?
Well, I mean, ahead of time.
Or is it fair to say, shut them all off? Listen, we know that they're brought up to believe in jihad. Keep them all out.
I don't want to get into politics. There are some people that would like to do that.
But I'm saying, is there a way to? I mean, you don't want terrorists coming into our country, of course.
I certainly don't want terrorists coming here, and I don't want people who are in this country committing acts of terrorism. And I'm not really entirely sure. This is like the big problem. Exactly what can you do? There are instances, and I think this goes really to law enforcement, where surveillance or monitoring, there were indications of potential problem. There were emails that were reviewed. There were credible sources. With 9/11, there were some credible sources that something was going to happen. What action took place? So I think that at that point, that's a good point, not to let anything really slip through the cracks if you have credible, information. And I'm certainly not in the area of law enforcement, and I don't want to tell them what to do. But I think that is a very good starting point. And if you're dealing with people that are known, that have committed a crime, where there's been credible threats, like the not the Columbine, but the shooting at the theater. Right. For instance, there was some credible information that he was decompensating.
But the problem is if they don't commit a crime.
That would be a good place to actually do something where you're combining psychology with law, and you're having maybe intervention teams, early intervention teams, screening teams that are combining a well-educated law enforcement officer with a background in psychology and or at least training in psychology with a psychologist who is an expert in this area, and combining forces to see if you need to do early intervention assessment and some preventive kind of measures.
But haven't we sort of gone away in this country from forcing people to get, I mean, let's talk about this person. Somebody said, oh, this guy seems crazy. And there's a lot of people who we think, hey, this guy's crazy. He talks about violent things, but they never committed a crime. So you can commit them for, a certain period of time, and then they get out. What do we do? And so I think that sort of, we've gone the other way where we don't want to do it, and then when they don't do anything in the psychological field, everyone goes, why don't you do something? Well, what can you do anymore? Haven't the laws changed where you can't really hold somebody and force them to get treatment? And is that fair?
Well, not everybody that would be identified as somebody who may need to be looked at would automatically be subject for civil commitment. I mean, the civil commitment law has to be complied with, and there has to be some sort of evidence or indication of dangerousness to self or others within the state system, within whatever legal system that particular state has in order to confine somebody. And obviously that would be a very good starting point to see if somebody actually is civilly confined, and because they're potentially dangerous to self or others. The governor in New York, with the passage of the SAFE Act, was trying to implement something that would put mental health practitioners at the front line for assessing the potential risk of dangerousness to others in their patients who actually were licensed to carry a firearm. Of course, that doesn't help with people who get them illegally or use the car as a weapon.
Isn't that what they say a lot of times?
So it's that kind of thing. But it has to be, the messages that we hear pretty often. If you see something, say something. That's realistic. Public education, teaching the public so that they're not automatically thinking that everybody, because they're different or maybe they're cognitively impaired or emotionally handicapped or challenged, automatically must be a potential budding serial killer or mass murderer, but to really educate them that the vast majority of them aren't. And if, the reality of it is that if you're providing proper care and treatment for individuals who are mentally ill, medication, access to providers, access to treatment facilities, if financial, taking care of their financial needs so that they're not homeless. I've worked with sex offenders who, upon discharge, were given a couple of dollars to hop a bus, sent to a shelter. Why would you put a sex offender in a shelter? Right. Why would you want them to have to go look for a job and take the subway when they were previously convicted of fraudurism, where they're rubbing up against it? Why would you put them in a crowded subway? Some of those things don't make sense. So these are suggestions that I think are logical, and with education can be followed up. With schools, when schools have been the target of violence and terrorist acts, what have schools done? They've come up with some sort of policies to improve security, to put cameras on the outside, to teach their teachers, to teach the students. They've taken measures, and I think that public education, I guess I could probably summarize it. Public education is essential, and to the extent that we really can push forward efforts to educate the public and to educate them correctly and to eliminate misperceptions, erroneous perceptions, you're not unfortunately going to shake prejudice. There's a lot of prejudice, and there's people who have stereotypes, and you're not going to change that. So you try to target children at a young age to sort of embrace others that are different than them, and not immediately grow up hating them when they're 5 years old.
Now let me ask you. You said hey, when you see something, say something. But what is it that you should see when you should say it? Because like you said, we all have the crazy relative, or we know the crazy person at work. What is it that you would say? Hey, this is a real red flag. Because you don't want to falsely do it either.
You'll look at some of the infrastructure. I mean, I'm amazed when I look at reservoirs, for instance, and there's gates around the reservoir, and there's a gaping hole in the gate,
Right.
and cameras take photos of this, and they put it on TV, they put it in the newspapers. It's, why don't you just draw a map? Here's a hole. Here, you can come here because we have no security. You can go to airports, and this particular door had no security. People were able to go in. They were able to put packages that were undetected. Why are you selling all this information?
Giving everybody, right.
I mean, that per se, I think, is a little ridiculous. But you have infrastructure that, in some aspects, is critical. Malls, mall security. Penn Station. Well, you see somebody lurking around, pacing back and forth.
But what about
Why?
a family
Why
kid?
3 hours at Penn Station?
Right. But I mean, if
walking
somebody's
back
on
and
the
forth?
internet and they're Googling all the time, terrorism or jihad, or they have an obsession with guns. I think we see a lot of these people that had multiple guns, and you would say, well, why the heck would this kid's parents go buy him 20 guns?
I think
is that a sign, though? An obsession with?
But I think that also there seems to be an increased interest in monitoring social media. Many of these people who committed horrific acts actually went to social media, and they were announcing it, and they were like putting up pictures,
Sort of bragging about it.
Exactly.
Joining.
So I think social media is a great
Which we all,
place.
if you could see something on there.
It's a great place, not only for people who frequent social media, but certainly for law enforcement. That's the way we need to look at our holes. We need to look at our weaknesses, our weak spots. Will that eliminate, like a diehard person who's going to absolutely want to commit a crime? Probably not. But will you decrease risk? I think at least it's a viable. These are viable risk reduction methods.
Now, is there anything we could do? I mean, now so we talked about the problem of people coming in, and we haven't solved the problem of the refugees. Whether we take them, how we screen them, but. We can't forget about the homegrown terrorists that seems to be increasing. What can we do as a society to stop people from becoming, well, I guess there's two issues. Do you separate the two? The people who are radicalized and are doing it for religious reasons, and people who are just going out there like to a movie theater and shooting people. Do you separate the two, or is there a correlation?
You have some acts that are fairly random, the product really of an individual who may have been living like on a borderline between loss of reality and being in touch with reality, motivated by comments posted on social media, motivated by news reports, motivated by pictures, by videos, by other people copycatting, and it's unfortunate.
So copycats are big.
Some of these things are realistic, and it's certainly possible that a factor, one piece, will send that person over the edge and say, okay, I'm next in line. This is what I'm doing. But I think it's very important that we really provide accurate information, and that we look at where are we lacking in resources, in making resources available to people who are there to provide services to these individuals, as well as to protect us from these individuals. And it should be a multi-agency coordinated effort where a computer with access, so that somebody in Texas can gain access to something going on in New York fairly quickly, and we're not sitting here wasting time. You're talking about like fringe elements and things like that. I think it's also important that we embrace religions, that we embrace diversity, that we come to recognize that religions per se are not these horrible the agents of terrorist acts. You're talking about a fringe element in most religions historically have had fringe elements and have committed horrendous crimes, but the vast majority of people are law-abiding and caring. And to the extent that we can embrace and educate people about what different kinds of religions look like and different aspects of diversity, that also will hopefully serve to curtail hate-related kinds of crime, people taking the law into their own hands, for instance. We've seen that. We've seen people. We've seen already victims since the San Bernardino tragedy, and I'm sure that there's victims, throughout the world anytime that there's some sort of a terrorist act. And also, sadly, there's a terrorist act. I think that the average is about 26 days after a terrorist act is committed before you start saying jokes. I mean, why the jokes? This is funny.
But do you think
it's really funny that a woman got raped, and you make a humorous joke about somebody that got raped, or about a Jew or a Muslim or a Christian, and why?
Right. Do you think that desensitizes us, that we hear these, that we think it's okay to tell jokes about it? Do you think?
I think it does.
It's distasteful, obviously.
I think it tells many people it seems to be okay, and it's hidden under the guise of humor. Right. We have microaggressions. I could say, hey, gee, you lost a few pounds. I didn't need you to tell me this. I mean, I'm either aware that I lost, or I'm not aware that I lost it. It's almost like a microaggression.
Right, exactly. And I know me personally now. I just went to the movies the other day, and I sat down, and when I first sat there, I said, "What am I, crazy sitting here? I'm like a lame duck sitting in a movie theater." I started looking for exits, and then I started the previews thinking, "What am I going to do if a guy gets up with a gun? Am I going to attack him? Am I going to run?" And I just know, I think about it wherever I go. I have friends who say, I would never go to Times Square anymore. I don't want to be in public places. Is this a rational fear?
Well, it's not irrational. It's unfortunate in the sense that, it's probably a rational fear, but it's really not based on high statistical probability.
I don't know anybody who was killed in a terrorist attack.
But it's certainly not something that would be unusual. Terrorism is a buzzword right now. We had the Pope here, and the Pope went to the 9/11 site, and of course it sort of reactivated our memories of what happened. In fact, 9/11 was just like 4 months ago, 3 months ago. So of course all of this spurs our memories, and then the Pope coming to visit, and that also attracted recollections of 9/11, and then we had several instances in schools and in military locations, and then unfortunately Paris, and then recently San Bernardino. So it's not at all surprising that people would be really, is it safe for me to go here? And you don't need to be someplace and worry, what am I going to do, as you said, if somebody pulls a gun? Right. What are you going to do if the lights go out? My wife the other day was shopping in a store, and she said that the lights went out, and everybody went running out the store, men first. And I said to her, well, that's probably because they went to get the car. She said, no, they were running out. They were running out, and it was really that the lights went out. Right. So I think we're very sensitized.
Yeah, we're hypersensitive.
You hear a loud sound, obviously you're going to react, and I agree with you to the extent that what it's doing is it's creating this chilling effect.
Right.
People are afraid to go out. They're worried for their children. Some of them are burying their heads in the sand and ignoring it. Or
we hear people talk about our politicians, and they say, "Don't give in to terrorism, because and if you change your life routine, then you're giving into it."
Yeah.
Is that good advice?
It is, because again, the statistics are highly improbable, and what's happening is that terrorists, and we're hearing, see another part of what's sensitizing us is that we're hearing from high-level politicians, including our president, that terrorism is global. Things like we're losing the battle of terrorism. That doesn't.
Well, you can't win, because some people, when he didn't say it was bad enough, people got upset, and then he went back and said we have to worry now.
That doesn't sit comfortably with anyone that we're losing the battle or the war of terrorism. It doesn't sit well with anybody. And we also heard. I think it was fairly recently that we heard that we're at a credible risk for a possible terrorist attack.
We're on code, high
Right.
alert. We're on code
we
red.
hear this. I mean, of course, all of this sensitizes people, and what's probably and it's also happening at a time period that is very crippling to our economy, because people who ordinarily would be traveling a lot and maybe by airplane now are not taking airplanes. Maybe they're curtailing their travels. They're going out less to the malls. Because of this, they're spending less in their goings out. And I think that the proof of potential psychology or terrorist-inflicted psychological damage translating into financial losses, we'll probably see that sometime in January when they look at what the businesses collected over the holidays. And I'm anticipating, unfortunately, that it's going to be
I think it is, from what I just
year.
anecdotally, hear. So what is a healthy way to deal with it? Because look, it's out there, right? I mean, I'm telling you, I do it, and my family does, and my sister has children. She's afraid to send the kids to the mall by themselves, or even to go to a movie. So what is a healthy way to deal with it?
There are many things that are really basically common sense. Just like I wouldn't at any point suggest or recommend a young female to go to a particular area at 4 a.m. Right. Where there's high crime. I think that some things really require good judgment. If you're looking at children, you need to know where they are. You need to know who their friends are. You need to know what they're doing. They have to
talk to them about terrorism.
I think it's okay to talk to them about safety, and I don't think that you should shun talking to them about terrorism to the extent that they can understand this, because they're getting it anywhere.
Right,
we're talking about our children are way more skilled than we are with the computer, with technology, and with social media. So they're getting all this stuff on social media anyway. Right. Why wouldn't you talk to them about it?
But what's the lesson to teach them, though? Because you're saying
you want to teach them, just like you want to teach them how not to be trolled or victims of trolls on social media. You want to teach them that you need to, if we tell you you have to be back at a certain time, you have to be back at that time. Make sure that they have a telephone, and that your number is on speed dial. Okay. You tell them, I want you to call me at such and such a time. Enforce it. I need to know where you are, what you're doing. I need to know who you're going with. Adults, same thing. Make sure you have a phone. Communicate with people what you're doing. The victims, for instance, of the Gilgo Beach, I think that there was more than one serial killer there, but some of the victims of the Gilgo Beach killer who were supposedly prostitutes, look at how they were being recruited. Why wouldn't they, for instance, give word, this is where I'm going? This is where I'm going to be. This is like the individual who contacted me. Right. It's playing smart. I think if you're going to you're going to go to a mall, go by all means. Be accompanied. Why would you park your car furthest away in the parking lot, and you're going alone, carrying all sorts of bags in the dark? You're putting yourself possibly at risk, and you're distracted by texting and by looking at your phone. There are things that you can do to decrease your risk of being.
But that's common sense. But what about the anxiety, though? I mean, I'm anxious to go to the, you're saying go to the movies. So I did go to the movies, but I had anxiety about it. I'm sure my blood pressure was up until the movie started and I got into it. But at the beginning, I definitely had anxiety. And some people may have it more than me. Or some people didn't go because they had.
Did you measure your blood pressure and blood sugar at that moment?
No, but I'm sure. I'm thinking my blood pressure was high because I felt it in my chest. And I said, you know what? And then I started to say to myself as I'm thinking, what am I, a schmuck? Why am I sitting here that I need to see the movie this bad? I could see it home on Netflix.
But what happened afterwards?
So I watched it and everything was fine, and I'm here today.
And didn't your anxiety level go down?
Yeah. I said as the movie started,
So now that your anxiety level went down, as a hypothetical, a friend of yours says that he or she would like to go with you to a movie or an outing on New Year's Eve. Not necessarily a movie, but an outing on New Year's Eve. As a result of having gone out and you did okay, do you anticipate your anxiety level would be just as high?
So no, I think it would be lower every time.
Okay, that's the reality. What happens is the more that you are exposed to real life situations. Kids going to school, nothing happening to them. People going to work, nothing happening to them. You going to malls, nothing happening to them, which is pretty, 99.999% probable. It'll decrease.
I heard one of the lectures you did, and you talked about PTSD, though, for people who were, in fact, you were talking about 9/11, but then you were talking about first responders who didn't actually see the towers go down, but dealt with the aftermath, and first responders for the, you were talking about people who witnessed the Boston bombing and people came after. Can somebody have PTSD? Because some of these symptoms that we're talking about sort of sound like they're PTSD. Can somebody have PTSD without ever experiencing a terrorist attack?
Sure. By seeing it.
Seeing it on TV?
Right. I mean, you're certainly, people who are of an age that were old enough when 9/11 happened. How many times do you think that you saw those towers go down?
Right, yeah, a lot.
Okay, well, I mean, wasn't it showing like every 2 minutes?
Right, yeah.
And you're bombarded with it. You're exposed to it nonstop. Part of it's sort of like a double-edged sword, because for some people, police officers who deal with car accidents, and they're actually exposed to really grisly
But they become numb.
scenes. After a while, you become desensitized to that. But prolonged exposure to a terrorist act, 9/11, the firefighters who were the first responders, EMS were first responders, and law enforcement were first responders. Prolonged exposure to that places them at risk for PTSD. Firefighters, for instance, were exposed to prolonged exposure. About 1/3 of them will develop PTSD, and approximately half of those will develop alcohol and substance abuse.
You say
problems.
develop, so it could happen years down the road, or you're talking weeks, months?
It's sort of like probably a long process.
Oh, okay.
It's not. I mean,
So it doesn't happen.
You could have acute symptoms, immediate symptoms, but it's also something that can be insidious and last over a period of time, and it's cumulative, because don't forget, these firefighters are being exposed to one scene after another. So to say which one necessarily caused the damage might be a little bit difficult. But when you're looking at hard acts, results of man-made terrorism, of tremendous acts of violence, of natural disasters, for instance, some of the tornadoes that we're experiencing right now. These are things that you're exposed to so much damage and so much injury that it will in its wake leave PTSD. The results of Superstorm Sandy. You're still having individuals now that aren't in their houses. They're still not in their houses. Many of them experience financial losses, emotional losses. Loss by injury, loss by death, loss by relocating. You see your house floating down, by the Long Beach. It's not where it used to be. It's floating away. These are things that persist, and certainly the victims. And you can be victimized by having been in the area, not necessarily exactly in the zone, but you were close by in the area. You might have been potentially victimized, or potentially a victim. You lost a loved one. You witnessed all these things as a first responder, or even just casually watching TV over and over and over again. Look at the children. It's terrible when parents let their children repeatedly watch these gruesome acts. You asked me before, should you talk to children about terrorism? I say yes, but that doesn't mean sit them in front of a TV glued to it watching horrific acts, especially young children. Young children live in a magical world. They think that they did something wrong. They think that because of something they thought or said, that they are culprits in some way, or their mommy and daddy are going to leave them or hate them or be angry with them. You don't want to do that with children, with like really small children. You need to look at appropriate age kinds of interactions and education with children. I don't think a 5-year-old should be on social media, but that's my personal opinion.
So how do you know if you're suffering from PTSD? Somebody like I just told you, I felt anxiety, and I have friends who feel anxiety. How do I know if it's just this normal anxiety, or if it's PTSD?
In your case, it's normal anxiety, because PTSD has very specific requirements. It's a diagnosis that is established in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual and the International Classification of Diseases, and there are certain criteria that must be satisfied. You were exposed to a traumatic event, you actually were there, you were exposed to it, and you either perceived imminent death or serious injury to yourself or to somebody else. So you actually were there, living through it, and or there's a category for first responders that they can qualify for PTSD. Beyond that, there are several elements that have to be satisfied. Difficulty sleeping, recurrent recollections of the incident, perhaps vivid images of it. They're called flashbacks. It's sort of like hallucinations that you may be awake and you'll experience it, or a sound will trigger it. I've had people who've been in car accidents and a smell will trigger a memory because they were witnessing or they were exposed to burning or oil or the airbag, the explosion of the airbag and the smell of the airbag, or sound of crashing. That's something that may trigger a memory. Avoidance. This is something that you're talking about. Right. Avoidance, not wanting to go
a lot of people
somewhere.
are doing it. So you say it has to have a couple all these symptoms.
But to the extent that somebody makes an effort to go someplace, they become nervous and they go back home. The act of going back home becomes reinforced. Why? Because the anxiety dissipates. So once your anxiety dissipates, you go home, and now you become more of a homebody because the going home was reinforced. So if you make another effort to go out, you say, I'm not going to bother. You feel anxious. So what's being reinforced? Staying home is being reinforced, and you're not giving yourself the opportunity really to cope with the anxiety. And there are ways of coping with the anxiety, and in your case, the anxiety is really irrational. It's not an anxiety that's based on something that is real. Well, many feelings of anxiety are not necessarily based on real things, and you want to be able to overcome the anxiety, and there are ways of coping with it, and one of them is desensitization, getting yourself to go out, searching for things that maybe you like doing this more than something else. So do what you like more, get out to that more, and that'll help decrease the anxiety so that when you have to do something, you won't be so paralyzed, you won't be so emotionally paralyzed or stunted. And I think that's what we really want to cope with.
So if you have somebody who is fear and they say, you know what, maybe I have PTSD. I think about this all the time. I'm obsessed with it. There is help for them, and they shouldn't feel ashamed to go to a psychologist and say, look, I wasn't at 9/11 or I wasn't at any of these terrorist attacks, but I'm still anxious about it, and it's affecting my life.
There's a lot of
there's
a lot of education that you can do on the internet. There's a lot of resources. For instance, New York State Psychological Association, which is my pride and joy since I'm going to be president of it on January 1st. We have resources. You go to the internet and you look up New York State Psychological Association. We have a website, and it provides some educational material. Suffolk County Psychological Association does the same thing. Nassau County Psychological Association also. Many organizations have what's called a disaster response network that provides information. They've received Red Cross training. So there's things that people can do to educate themselves and to look at actual YouTube presentations and video presentations and read things without having to make an appointment with a psychologist or other mental health professional.
Am I right in feeling that just almost knowing that this is real, like somebody giving it a name, saying, you know what, I have PTSD, I'm not crazy, this is real. Does that help the problem?
I think to the extent that you understand what's involved, where it came from, and significally what you can do to cope with it and to make it
curable,
better.
Right? I mean, you can treat people with PTSD.
Yeah, I think in terms of somebody with PTSD and or some other emotional reaction who would need to seek professional help is when for some reason their life has changed dramatically. They're not going to work, they're not taking care of their appearance, they're not bathing, they're not eating, or they're
what if I see that happening to somebody else?
They're abusing drugs, medications, alcohol, they're becoming aggressive, or they're overly passive, they're crying all the time, staying in bed all the time. skipping school. I mean, those are reactions and behaviors that are not helpful, not healthy, and they would require perhaps a referral to a professional.
Right.
You didn't have that.
Right. And I'm here today in the studio.
I want to differentiate
Right.
something that's like a fairly normal anxiety reaction from something that's really...
Having you say that something I did was normal, that's pretty good. Some people may beg to differ with you. Well, Dr. Aranda, I thank you very much for coming. Got a lot of information, and we'll definitely have you back to talk about some of the other issues. I'm Gary Jacobs, and thank you for joining us on Long Island Backstory.
They'll test you. Try to break your will. But however loud the loudness gets, however many cheese puffs may fly, you're the driver, the one in control. Stand firm. Just wait. And move only when you hear the click that says they're buckled in for the drive. Never give up till they buckle up.
They told me a bottle couldn't dream. That I would never become a superhero. But I learned how to fly. Just to come back in a new disguise. And be the hero that I've always wanted to be.